I'm Roger Horton, Chair of the Committee, and with me today is Councilmember Helene Schneider. Our agenda today consists of one item, which is the joint participation agreement for the Kachuma Operation and Maintenance Board bond issuance. And I see we have an audience in our hall here, and we will turn this thing over to Mr. Pearson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councilmember Schneider, Bob Pearson, Finance Director. And as you said, we have one item today, Kachuma Operations and Maintenance Board. It's joint powers, as you know, that we're a member of, and they're proposing a debt issuance. And we do have people here to explain that and to take you through the process and what is proposed and the rationale behind it. And I will start by turning it over to Rebecca Bjork, our Water Resources Manager.
Thank you, Finance Committee. I just wanted to briefly explain the city's relationship with COME. COME is a joint powers authority that operates the infrastructure with Kachuma Lake. So they are responsible for operating the infrastructure that delivers the water through the tunnel and in the big pipeline to Arcata water treatment plant. And as such, they have a responsibility for operating a fairly significant infrastructure. And the item you're going to hear today is their proposal for bond funding to do some significant repair work on that system. And Kate Reese, who is the manager for COME, is going to make a presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Finance Committee. I'm Kate Reese, the General Manager for Kachuma Operation and Maintenance Board. And as Rebecca mentioned, the city is a member unit of COME, along with the city Carpinteria Water District, Montecito Water District, Goleta Water District, and the San Ynez River Water Conservation District, ID number 1. And I think I left someone out. Okay, I guess that's it. And as she did mention, the Kachuma project was built in the mid-50s, and so it's more than 50 years old. And we are really in need of carrying out some fairly major improvements to the system. About 7 or 8 years ago, we had a reliability study done, and a number of capital improvement projects were identified that really needed to be carried out within the relatively near future in order for us to reliably continue delivering Kachuma water to the South Coast. And primarily the major project is one that I will highlight through the presentation. So first of all, I'd like to talk about the funding for our capital improvement projects, why we are suggesting a bond issuance and how we expect to pay for those. A little bit of a summary, a list of the capital improvement projects for you, and then the importance of the priority projects that we are requesting the COME Board to include in the bond issuance. So the funding for the CIP projects, we are going to try to issue an approximate $16 million revenue bond to fund several large projects. Right now, the COME annual budget has a line item in it, which we call special projects or capital improvement projects. That runs, in order to pay for the bond, we would be taking most of that annual budget that we have at about $1.1 million as a debt service repayment. That would be constant over a 30-year bond issuance. And the other source of funds that we have coming in for this program is from Proposition 50. We were one of 15 agencies, along with the city, to receive $3.2 million for a second pipeline project in the Goleta area, HAIA. We have tried to structure this so that we will have little or no additional financial impact to the member units, at least in the short term, by keeping our budget constant for about 5 years while we build these projects. And at that time, we would have to figure out how to continue doing capital improvement work. But at least in the short term, we are anticipating a relatively flat budget for our capital work. We have a very good financial team, which will be speaking with you in a moment, and with their recommendations and examination into what our needs are, we have collectively determined that a bond is the most efficient way to fund these large capital projects. We really were going to try to do this close to a year ago, and we were getting really prepared when the economy took a real nosedive, and so we put all of our bond discussions sort of on hold while we waited to see what happened with the economy. And I think very positive things have occurred in the bond market where we have been told it's almost completely recovered. Interest rates are not quite as low as what they were historically, but they are in very good shape. And so the recommendation is still to go forward with a revenue bond. Direct funding from the member units is really not possible. We have the city of Santa Barbara and Goleta are larger districts, but the other districts are small. They are really strapped for cash. They too have all of their own infrastructure problems and funding for their own districts. And COMB is absolutely dependent upon revenue from those districts in order to fund our annual budget. There's no way they could come up with $9 or $10 million in a single year in order for us to do some major work, particularly for this large pipeline project. But all of these projects we're suggesting are, between $2 or $3 million and maybe $9, and it's not possible to do that in one fiscal year. The other problem is that COMB carries no reserves. The member units voted long ago to keep that money in their own reserve account. And if we do need money for emergency work or for capital work, they fund us directly as needed. We don't carry any reserves. It's just an annual budget year to year. So that's a little tricky to operate as well. The normal capital improvement budget for COMB is about $1.5 million. Our total budget runs about $3.5 million. We are suggesting that the debt service would be approximately $1.1 million, which is for principal and interest for a 30-year obligation. The remaining $400,000 would be used for smaller projects that primarily our staff or smaller engineering consultants or contractors would carry out. So we would carry that also. In order to determine how much the bond issuance will be, we're going to keep that $1.1 million as the debt service. That will then drive the ultimate amount of money that we would be borrowing. So we are not saying it's an absolute $16 million and whatever the repayment amount turns out to be, that's what it is. We're working on the repayment amount in order to keep a flat budget for about 5 years in this category. And so that will determine how much we actually borrow. There are a number of projects through this bond issuance that are going to be done. It's not all wrapped up in one project. And so we have the flexibility of taking projects off the list if we don't have enough money for all of them, or if we get really good rates from bids on some of the projects, we can add one to it. So that's the way that we've tried to structure it. After about 5 years, we will need an influx of money to continue doing capital work, and one source we have identified for the member units to consider is that the Kachuma project itself, which was built in the 50s, will finally be paid for in 2015. That's about $1 million a year from all 5 member units that you are currently paying. That is potentially one source of funds that could shift to continue to do capital improvement project work for COMB after 2015. The projects that are listed here are our primary projects. The top 5 are the ones that are currently being proposed for the bond issue, but I'll come back to the COMB office facilities in just a moment. The most important one is the second pipeline project in the Goleta area. This is to add a redundant section of pipeline to the one already there at the uppermost part of the South Coast Conduit, which is 26 miles long and goes from Goleta to Carpinteria. We have no way to ever shut down the water or to do improvement work or rehab work for that section of pipe. It's in a very steep canyon, and after the Gap fire, we really noticed how much erosion and slippage and so on, and so that we do run the risk of landsliding and so on. To have a section in that pipe, a redundant section in that area would be very beneficial. Primarily, the project is to restore the original capacity of the 48-inch pipeline in that area. Over many years, there have been appurtenances which have been attached for the Corona water treatment plant and for other things that have reduced the capacity of that pipeline so that we do not have the same amount of water flowing through it as we did originally. It's not to increase total capacity, it's to restore the capacity that once was there.
Kate, in our document, page 1 of 17, the amount for the project is 9165 versus your 9065, so there's $100K somewhere.
We have done some reevaluation on the cost of the project and brought consulting costs and engineering costs down. And we actually fully expect that this dollar figure will drop as well. This is for construction and oversight engineering. We've completed all the engineering work. These numbers are a little fluid in that we don't have firm costs yet. This project is out for bid, and we hope when we get construction bids in that we will see it drop further. So we are trying still, as we go through this, to continually drop the cost of these various projects. The Mission Creek Pipeline Project also is important. There was a section of pipeline right in Mission Creek that was damaged in the 80s. A big boulder and a big storm really expose the pipeline and hit it. Rather than dig it up and repair it, concrete was just dumped over the top. It's like a time bomb waiting to happen, and we could have a major rupture of the pipeline in that area. There's another couple of creek crossings where the South Coast conduit is also exposed, and so this would be to take care of the Mission Creek pipeline and also a couple of others. On top of this, the City of Santa Barbara was planning to do a fish passage restoration project at that same location. This is right on Highway 192 by the tennis court at Mission Creek. And we will have to do mitigation for this project because it's right in a stream that has endangered steelhead. So Combs Project will also be taking over the city's fisheries project, of which the designs were already completed, and we would be paying for our fish restoration project to complete after we complete the pipeline, the repair of the pipeline in that area. So it has a really good benefit environmentally as well. The third one is a South Coast Conduit right-of-way definition program. You'd think that we'd know really right exactly where the South Coast Conduit is located, and we do for the most part, but it is buried at varying depths. It jogs all the way along. At the time, there was no such thing as GPS, and so we are slowly putting together a much better picture of where it's located, the depth, whose property it crosses, all the APN maps, the surveys, and it's essential for us to be able to do that. We had damage to part of the pipeline in Coyote Creek recently, partially because the line wasn't marked properly, and partially because it could have been avoided if we had markers all the way down the pipeline so everybody knew where it was. So this is essential for us to really get this one done as well. The lateral air vent work, these could be done in pieces. We have about 200 structures along the pipeline, and many of them need upgrading, and this is to allow us to do that. Primarily in the Carpinteria area, there's a section of 44 meters in laterals which have never been rehabbed because we can never turn the water off in the Carpinteria area. We've now installed some line valves there so we can isolate sections of that area, so this would be to start work in that section of the pipeline. And lastly, we have a Comb office facility. That now says 2890. We have recently talked to an architect, and they believe they can bring that down to about $2 million. But this has become quite controversial. There are some of the member agency directors who do not feel that Comb should build a building at this time. In these hard economic times, frankly, it's a very good time to build it because contractors are coming in with lower bids. But there is a big controversy regarding this. I'll come back to it a little, but just to let you know about it, all of the rest of these projects are on the South Coast. The Santa Ynez ID number 1 does not pay for any of the projects on the South Coast, although they are a member unit of Comb. That's been the case from the beginning. They didn't pay the construction costs for the tunnel or the conduit, so that's legitimate. However, we do run the fisheries program for CCRB out of the same Comb facility, and ID1 does pay for part of that fisheries program. So there is some benefit to them to have an office building there. Comb has never had a bona fide office building. We have a boardroom, and we have temporary trailers that we've worked in for as long as I've been there, which is 16 years. And we really do need a permanent facility at some point. ID number 1, however, has decided and informed the rest of the member units that it will not pay for any portion of an office building. Therefore, the 4 South Coast members are, it is included in the bond issue, but there has at least been one discussion with Goleta Water Board who feels this is unfair, that they should pay some share of it, and they have requested that Comb remove this project from the list of projects to be funded by the bond. I agree with that because I don't want to jeopardize the rest of these projects. As much as we need one, if this is the one that goes, it's the low-hanging fruit, and maybe when we get the bond issue, we won't even have enough money for it.
On that, I couldn't really tell from page 9 of our report. Are you thinking of bringing in a prefab building and erecting it on site, or what was your?
No, we weren't really considering that. We were considering regular construction with to take down the boardroom and garage that is below the boardroom. It's a 2-story structure, and build a 2-story office building with garage space as well. About 6 years ago, we looked at this project, and we did take a look at prefab buildings. We looked at leasing a building off-site, although all of our equipment and trucks and all that are on this site. We looked at different, full construction or replacing all the trailers, and the thought at that time by the board and the Cone Board still feels that this is a permanent facility that will be there for a long time, and that permanent construction of a building would be better than prefab building. So, that's not to say that's how it would go at the end of the day. Even if it's included in the bond issue, the estimate is for regular construction. But if the board decided, okay, we've got some money left over and let's take another look at what we should do there, they certainly could do that. These all have to be approved individually before we go forward with anything with regard to bids and project design and so on.
Yes, question?
Thank you, Ron. Kate, I've been familiar with this for a very long time and liaison to the Water Commission and member on the CCWA, which is the Central Coast Water Authority, and alternate to COME. But I am a little concerned if this is taken out of the bond issuance, when, how, under what circumstances, on what planet are you going to be able to build a $2.5 to $3 million facility, which COME and CCWA and all the various, even ID1 needs to do. Is there any hope for resolution separately, a separate bond issuance? What are you thinking in terms of that? Because, this is just silliness, if you ask me personally.
That's a question that's come up, and that's precisely why we're suggesting it now. I frankly don't think there will be another opportunity for long-term financing. And as I mentioned before, for the members to come up with $2 or $3 million in one fiscal year, especially if one doesn't pay for it, that's almost impossible. Maybe the bigger districts could do it. It would be very difficult for Carpinteria or Montecito, let's say, to be able to do that, or ID1. So I don't know how it would ever be financed. I think more than likely we would probably have to trade out the mobile offices we have, which are like mobile homes.
They are, they're trailers. I've been in them.
One facility is more than 20 years old, and it has a lot of dry rot and so on. We really need to change it out. The other two are a little newer. We don't have sufficient space. Our fisheries crew is crammed into very small space. And so we do have a real need, but I really don't have an answer for that. Unless at some time in future, let's say in 5 years, the board were to decide to fund the financing of a new office building at that time, or if they would start collecting money as a reserve fund for the office building over several years so that we would accumulate the amount of money it would take to build the building in future.
So by pulling it out and moving forward, which, at the end of the day, on balance, I'm going to agree with, because, the projects there are 20 of them, and this is one small, really not critical piece. But the reality is that we would be condemning the future of the facility, probably well into the future, and condemning the staff to living under the conditions that they are. Nobody's talking about building a palace, but if you've ever been up there, you know what you're dealing with. So that is the reality of it, but you don't see any other way around it there.
Well, at this point I don't, only because ID1 was not ever included in the bond issue precisely because it would take too long to negotiate this particular cost share project. So the Cone Board decided early on they'll put it in. They'll only have the bond issue be for the 4 South Coast member units. But it was anticipated to come back with ID1 in a side negotiation, a different agreement to be able to address this issue. But the ID1 board met about 2 weeks ago and decided that they would not pay for any portion of the building through a bond or in an outside agreement. One of their other issues has to do with the fact that it's on Bureau of Reclamation federal land. Frankly, that's a bonus because we don't have to buy the land. Their concern somehow is that the Bureau of Reclamation will designate those facilities to be used for other purposes at some time in future, other than the Kachuma project. That will not occur. I don't have it in writing yet, but I will do. But the Bureau has indicated that this COME facility would be permanently attached for the South Coast, for the Kachuma project, and that COME would own the office building at the end of the day. And we are also going to go through and try to have the parcel upon which it sits turned over to COME as well. So we can maybe address that. But I really don't know that we're going to be successful this round.
We have another question, Kate.
Certainly.
Thank you. I guess I'm curious about the timeline, the chronology of events between the funding estimates and the decisions by the different bodies. You mentioned, even though it's up on the screen, the office facilities is 2.9 million per se. You're saying now the new estimate is down to 2 million.
We got a conceptual. We have conceptual drawings done, and our architect did just get one contractor to give a ballpark figure. It came in at around 2.5 million. But there are some features of the new office building which are very desirable, such as solar panels and a green roof and so on, that, some things could come off to reduce the cost. So I'm fully expecting we can bring it down to 2 million.
Okay. And then in the report that was in our packet, the amount was 3.6 million. So if you bring it down to 2 million, we're looking at a difference of $1.6 million.
Correct.
So when these other agencies were making determinations of whether or not to include this or not, were they looking at the 3.6 million, or were they thinking about the 2 million?
I think they were thinking closer to 3. The
Thinking to
3.6 was purely a planning estimate, and we didn't have drawings at that time.
And if we were to wait a number of years before looking at this again, do you expect that estimate to go back up to 3 or
would.
3.6?
I would. 6 years ago, it was 1.6 million, and the board turned it down because they felt it was too expensive.
So now we're looking at potentially 2 million, and if we wait, it might go up to, again, 3.6
Right.
if we don't act now.
Right.
That's what we're basically,
Right.
and the, I guess the other piece, for the other part of the South Coast conduit members, South Coast members, the proportion of what we would be paying for now versus 5 years from now would be dramatically different, obviously, if the price goes up.
Right.
Is the going to bond, is it possible to put this on a very final last, on the priority list, put that at the bottom of the list and see where we get with the others before?
Yes, and that's exactly where it is.
Can we secure a low bid for a long period of time in order to, wait and see how it works in terms of making sure we're able to do the other projects and see if there's funding available at the end?
Well, I'm not a contractor, but I don't know how long a period of time they would honor a bid.
Right.
I
Not
think
too long.
certainly not for pipeline projects. They're calling the supplier the hour before they turn those bids
Right.
in. Perhaps for an office building facility, it might be able to be on a little bit longer. I'm really not too sure.
But we're not talking months and months and months and months.
No,
I mean, that's what,
no.
with our airport bond was the same kind of issue. We put in, I think, was it a 3-month delay of when
Mm-hmm.
we were holding the bid for the bond market?
Exactly. Normally, our engineers say it's 45 to 60 days. We got them to extend to 90.
And that worked for
And
us
it
very
worked,
well,
although...
under very unusual circumstances.
Yeah, and also we were told that the longer we extended that we asked them to hold the bids, the more likely they were to pad their bid estimates for the risk of changing materials costs and the like. So there is a risk.
Okay, so that's the balancing act, that if we go forward today, it's a controversial issue, but the funding is probably much less than if we were to wait and come back later for something that is needed due to the type of facilities that you have right
My
now.
recommendation to the COMB board, we had a special meeting, was to drop the office building so that we could move forward and get rid of this. This is only one of our controversial issues on this whole bond issue. Director Williams, Doss Williams, who's on City Council, felt as you did, that this was our only opportunity, really, in the foreseeable future to fund this building, and so it did stay on. But since that time, with ID1's decision,
Right.
It has resurfaced, and we're getting up to where we really need to build the second pipeline project. The Proposition 50 money dies in 2012.
Okay. That's
Providing
good.
that we get it from the state, that's sort of an iffy thing, too. We're hoping, of course, that we will get all of that money back. What we could do is take it off the list now, which would mean we wouldn't reduce the bond issue. We would move one of the other ones up there so we can continue having as much money as possible to do our capital improvement work. And if we are successful in getting some money at the end to revisit this office building, I think I would recommend that the board do that. Okay, the other ones there are just projects that we would move in to fill in the void if the office building comes off. I think I won't really... I think you know the importance of the project. It's about 50 years old. There really aren't any alternate water supplies to the water coming in from Kachuma, which provides about 80% of our water supply on the South Coast. And it really is essential to maintain reliability of those Kachuma deliveries, and the bond, we feel, is the best way to do that. So in summary then, the COMB would issue a bond for about $16 million, depending on, as I said, backing into it with a $1.1 million principal and interest payment for 30 years. We hope to get $3.2 million back from Prop 50, and then the reliability of the water deliveries we certainly feel would be very much enhanced. Before I leave, I did want to bring up one other controversy with regard to the bond issuance. That is with Carpinteria Valley Water District. They have requested that the COMB board change the historic Kachuma entitlement cost share percentages for repayment of this bond issue. When the Kachuma project was built in the 50s, everybody, all the member units said, I need 30%, I need 12%, and so on. So the entitlement for water for the city and the other member units were set in the mid-50s, actually a little before that. COMB has always operated as all for one and one for all, if you will, where whatever is done on the whole Kachuma project facilities, whether it's in Goleta, the city, Carpinteria, Montecito, everybody pays their entitlement share of those costs based on the entitlement of water that you get. That's been the case forever. Carpinteria has indicated that they feel this is an antiquated system, that the conduit is being used differently than it was then, primarily because it transports non-Kachuma water now where it did not originally. We have Kachuma water that flows through the South Coast Conduit. In addition, state water now comes into the lake and is delivered through the Kachuma facilities in the same South Coast Conduit facilities. However, every member unit who orders state water pays a fee of $55 an acre foot. $15 goes to the federal government, but $43 an acre foot goes into a Warren Act trust fund. Warren Act is because of non-Kachuma project water. It was an act with the Bureau of Reclamation. So all of those members are already paying $43 an acre foot more for the privilege of using the Kachuma project storage in the lake and conveyance through the facilities. Carpinteria feels because they have developed a methodology that would tweak these percentages, which in my opinion would double charge for state water conveyance as a wheeling charge. Consequently, that district feels that those member units who order and have delivered more state water should pay a higher percentage for improvements. The COMB board disagreed with that, and they were unwilling to entertain the thought that the percentages should be changed only for this bond issue. But to accommodate Carpinteria's request, our bond counsel added into the bond language a provision that does not lock these percentage repayment percentages in place. If all 5 members agree, or 4, just the bond issue really, agree to have a different percentage cost sharing in the future, that can be done. The bond issue will allow that, the bond language in the official statement. In addition, the COMB board has agreed to finance a comprehensive cost-benefit analysis. We've said not to exceed $80,000 to be able to look not only at is this fair or equitable, but there are a host of other things out there potentially that are inequitable for one of the other member units, including the city. 2 examples for the city is that Kachuma project water rates are billed in agricultural rates and M&I rates. The bills that we get from the Bureau have higher ag rates. The city suggested, and it was subsequently adopted, to have a melded rate so that agricultural rates are a little lower, M&I are a little higher. So although the city has no ag, you pay higher for your water rates from Kachuma than you would otherwise because of this melded rate structure. This helps those who have agriculture like Carpinteria or Goleta. And it was sort of to make sure that it could all work more smoothly. The city has traditionally allowed Gibraltar water to come into Laurel Reservoir, which is one of our holding reservoirs. That has allowed us to be able to have enough water in Laurel Reservoir to provide peak demand period in the summer. With the loss of capacity in Gibraltar, that's going to be reduced, which is why it's essential that we do this second pipeline project to restore the original flow capacity of the system at the upper end. Those are only 2 examples, and there are a lot of other examples that needed to be addressed. So the COMB board agreed they will do a full-on study outside of the bond issuance presented this to Carpinteria, and that board sent back letter number 3, or at least the general manager did. This was still not acceptable. So I do not know at this point if the Carpinteria board will vote to participate in this bond issue. They meet on August the 26th. I just wanted you to be aware of that.
We have another question.
Yes.
Now, Kate, a couple of fundamental questions. Does Carpinteria take any state water? I mean, I know we don't use our allotment. We have a certain allotment. What we use is a third of our allotment or something similar to that, and we pass through the rest of our allotment to Montecito. But does Carpinteria take any state water on their own?
They do occasionally, not a great deal. All of the member units take South Coast member units take state water at least enough to satisfy an exchange agreement with ID number 1,
Right.
who is no longer physically connected to the reservoir. So they get their Kachuma entitlement by exchanging state water with the South Coast members. And so that occurs.
Because ID1 is not a member of CCWA.
Yeah, they are.
Oh, they are.
They
are.
yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry.
But the problem is they're physically severed from the reservoir, so they cannot
Okay.
take Kachuma water. But I believe that Carpinteria does not take very much at all beyond that. Although Janet Gingras is and my administrative manager does all the water accounting. She could probably answer that question better than I could.
You have to be on a microphone, but I don't need an involved answer. I just need to know that they take some water.
Yeah.
Okay.
Last year, 07-08 water year was 300 acre feet, so there's a...
Oh, yeah, okay, well. And they do that to keep these various exchange agreements alive.
Yes.
And kind of like we do, because we
They
don't
do
really
not
need
feel
the
they really
state
need
water.
state water. In fact, they're trying to sell their state water.
And the formula has always been on a pro rata basis.
Correct.
And they want to change this because they think that they can pay less because they take so little.
Correct. They feel they should not pay as much for the improvements to the facilities when they are, let's say, only taking Kachuma water. They feel those agencies taking both Kachuma and state water through the facility should pay more for its improvements.
So what's good for the goose would be good for the gander, in that there are a whole lot of other provisions that all the other jurisdictions have where the equities may or may not be exact. So if we're going to talk about the equities, they may be in for a few surprises.
Correct.
In
I
other
think
areas.
That's true. I mean, once the study is done, it may show that that other of the member units
Can get breaks on
Right.
other aspects of it.
Right.
Okay, just
So
trying
at
to
the
get
end
it
of the
clear.
day, everybody would have to vote if there was going to be any kind of change to the cost distribution, but that takes quite a bit of study, and it's going to take us some time to identify the scope of work and also to hire the proper consultant to do that work.
Thank you.
If now's a good time, could you talk about Prop 50 a little bit? for
Sure.
me?
Proposition 50, the Santa Barbara County developed its own region, developed an integrated regional water management plan, and about 29 water agencies and wastewater agencies, almost every water agency in the entire county came together as a group of cooperating partners. Everybody put forth various projects that they would like to have funded, and the group went through a ranking, and 15 of those agencies were successful in putting together a $25 million proposal to the State Water Resources Control Board and Department of Water Resources for funding from Proposition 50. Santa Barbara was successful in round 2 and got $25 million for the county, and that is being financed through the State Water Resources Control Board as the grantor. Combe was on the list for its second pipeline project, which we estimate to be about $9 million. And so we will be getting reimbursed $3.2 million of that 25 for the Combe project. So as we are doing work, we are submitting reimbursement requests.
So
as are
the
other agencies.
matching part of that, Kate?
Yes, the matching funds for that really are, the rest are, well, we put $8 million in that bond because they wouldn't let it, that we had to use $2008. So we have about $5 million of matching funds. Our concern is that already 2 of the agencies to be funded out of Prop 50, which are the disadvantaged communities because of reduction in their own, because of the state budget crisis and the state economic crisis, have lost their matching funds. One is Guadalupe, and that's about $3 million, and one is Cuyama. That's not very much money, but the big one was. And there is concern that there may be other projects that can't meet their matching funds. One of the reasons, if not the only reason, we were successful, and we scored only 1 point higher than San Luis Obispo County's integrated plan. And one of the reasons we were successful, we had a 75% match. That included $5 million from COMB. If we get to a point where we lose Prop 50 money, because let's say this whole thing falls apart, and we have no other way to fund the second pipeline project, the potential exists that the matching fund amount for Prop 50 for everybody, all 15 projects, could jeopardize Santa Barbara keeping this contract. The State Water Board can pull this contract for virtually any reason. The contract was completely in their favor. And if they choose to do that because they don't feel that we can come up with matching funds and give it to San Luis Obispo, not only does COMB lose, but every single project on that agency on that list loses out.
What I'm trying to get a handle on, and maybe the bond council can help, is to what extent are the calculations based on this Prop 50 funds being in there?
For us, we have not included them. We are requesting money for these projects as though we didn't have any Prop 50 money. So the $16 million is exclusive of the Prop 50 money. It's about fees and so on. We hope to realize about $15,500,000 from the bond. We would add the $3.2 million to it for a total of $18.5 million.
But it's matched, right? The 3.2. So isn't it 6.4? What?
The bond money. I'm sorry. Yes, for the bond money.
No,
for the code. Sorry,
the Prop 50.
I'm sorry. We would not have a match. And therefore, the COMB project would have to fall off the list of the Proposition 50 projects.
Okay, I'm confused.
We would not be able to provide a match. The way that we are providing a match is through the bond issuance. Our matching funds come out of the bond money.
It's part of the bond proceeds.
Yes, sorry. I beg your pardon.
That's what I was looking for. Okay.
Thank you.
Just to bring it back to the City of Santa Barbara's budget and how this connection with COMB, and so I understand it, those listening understand it, that from what you've said, we're already paying our proportion of the $1.1 million to capital funds currently.
Correct.
And that amount of money for the next 5 years will just be shifted over to pay the bond debt service.
Correct.
And then after 5 years, because the Kachuma project will be paid for from way back, the money that we're currently putting in for that debt service will no longer have to be paid for that debt service. We can shift that over if the board and us decide to do so at that point to pay for the debt service beyond the 5 years. Am
That's
I
correct.
understanding that correctly?
So theoretically, for the full 30 years, we wouldn't have much of an increase in that particular line item for the debt service.
And this is
if
through
we chose to
our
do that.
water fund department, not
Yes.
our general fund department, just to be really
Yes.
clear about that, in terms of how that funding pass-through works in terms of between the City of Santa Barbara and COMB. Is that all correct?
That is correct. It's funded out of our Water Enterprise Fund and is funded by ratepayers, not taxpayers.
Correct. But even the amount that we're paying into COMB, you don't expect it to increase dramatically, at least none in the short term, and then perhaps not even anything, because we're just shifting the funding that we're putting in currently for one project that will then be paid for, and then reallocating those funds for these projects. Okay. Thank you.
Is this a good time to just throw questions out? Or?
Mr. Chair, could I interrupt just a second? Because I wanted you to know, I don't think you're aware, we still have one more PowerPoint presentation to go through on the bond issue itself.
Okay.
I mean, that was the plan, at least.
I do have some fairly detailed questions about the bond, so maybe now's the time to hear that one then?
I think that if you had bond-related questions, we should hear the presentation first.
That's what I mean.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes is the answer.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Thank you. So,
David, are you?
Who's up first? David? All right. I'd like
Yeah.
to introduce David Broadsley with KNN, and he's our financial advisor. Good.
Yes. As you know, welcome back to David, because he's our financial advisor as well and was a team leader on getting us our airport deal.
Good afternoon. Yeah, I'm here today wearing primarily the hat as financial advisor to COMB on this, but it's not a coincidence that I ended up talking with COMB because of the relationship with the city. I thought I'd start by giving just another snapshot of the bond market. We all know painfully well what happened last fall, and it certainly affected the city's planning for its airport issue. And if you look at the market and interest rates, the blue on the top is the bond buyer 20, which is a tax-exempt index. You can see the large spikiness back in the fall, and then the trending downward since that time, to the point where the interest rates are getting pretty close to where they were in the good old days. And more importantly is that the market is returning and increasingly getting healthy. More issues are entering the market. More investors are putting their money back into bond funds, which helps rates. And the federal stimulus bill created a new kind of taxable bond called Build America bonds, where rather than selling bonds tax exempt, you sell taxable bonds and you get a direct subsidy from the Treasury. It's not relevant directly to the COMB issue, but it's resulted in the supply of municipal bonds being reduced. And since interest rates are supply-demand driven, all that's been helping the interest rate environment. So it is a good time to borrow money, generally speaking. It's not a perfect time, but when combined with the low cost of construction contracting, it's, the cost of projects overall are very favorable. Credit spreads are still a big issue, meaning that lower ratings are paying up a whole lot more for the differential than they used to before the credit crisis. But water bonds are a favored bond issue. So, again, when we started talking, this slide was to explain why the COMB wasn't being crazy, even talking about financing. Over the course of the last couple of months, this has evolved into a much happier picture generally. A little just about the bond issue itself. It's fairly straightforward, but we have four agencies who are making payments to COMB, and then COMB will make payments through a trustee of the bondholders. That's up there because we're going to talk about the joint participation agreement, which is one of the contracts required for this financing. I'll get to it in a second, but just to sort of give you a picture of the flow of funds. Next page is sources and uses. It's built on the assumption of $1.1 million in debt service at a certain set of rates, a 30-year term. If you see in the left, you can see there's a little just shy of 15.3 in net proceeds going to projects. The biggest extra user of proceeds is funding a reserve fund, which is a typical feature of revenue bonds. 1 year's worth of debt service is put away so that there's minimal risk to any cash flow disruption to bondholders. That's invested, earns money, used to carry itself. In today's reinvestment rates doesn't. It's a drag, but at some point probably will start carrying itself. And then on the right, you can see the allocation of debt service based on the historic allocations of COMB payments. So it's about just shy of $400,000 worth of payment from the city. It's part of what you're already paying COMB, as has been explained. A little bit about what you are approving and the council will be approving when it takes up this matter. And Doug Brown is in the front row. He's with Stradling Yucca, and he has been serving as bond counsel and disclosure counsel to COMB and is the author of the various documents. The joint participation agreement is a new contract which basically takes your existing payments under a whole series of obligations, takes out this piece of it and turns it into a financing type contract. It's actually a very elegant way of simplifying the legal flow, which would be a phone book worth of historical documents, and creating a new document that is tailored to the needs of a bond issue. And it takes that payment obligation and makes it a take or pay kind of contract, not unlike the contract you have for the state water project. Because of the history of your water obligations, this will be treated as parity debt to your existing water debt, your bonds and certificates of participation. That's actually a little different than the other entities are treating it. It has to do with the history of your bond contracts. A lot of time went into analysis by your city attorney and by outside counsel to the city, Orrick Carrington. And I guess the short answer is that it would cost you more to prove otherwise at this point than just to concede it's parity debt. The only real difference is it means that your rates have to provide coverage to this obligation like it would a bond issue, meaning that your net revenues have to be 20% above that. Practically speaking, you already have 2.7 times coverage, 2.8 times coverage, so this makes your coverage 2.7 or something. It has no real impact on rates. But it's worth highlighting only because it's a little bit different for Santa Barbara, just because of the history of your prior bond transactions and the requirements of that. The COME obligation can be prepaid if the city wants to prepay its obligation to COME, like it would a bond issue. You have no responsibility for the payments of the other members. And the only major commitment is to continuing disclosure information like you currently do for your own bond issues and you do for the Central Coast Water Authority. Let's see what else. The other document you'll be approving besides the joint participation agreement, which is the financing agreement, the city will be approving one of the appendices to the offering memorandum, this official statement, which is the description of the city in that document. I don't know if a draft was submitted yet. It will be submitted with the council files, and it's basically pattern off of your current continuing disclosure documents for your current water bonds and what you do for the CCWA. But that will be an ongoing commitment. You have to prove it up front, and you'll be filing reports, which is required by federal securities law. And then turning to just for information purposes, what COME has to approve, there's an indenture of trust, which is basically the bond issuance documents, which has the basic security provisions and the legal covenants and creates the funds and the like. There is the joint participation agreement, which you'll be executing and which COME will be executing with all the members who are participating, the full official statement, which is approved by COME, and then the promises to bondholders to do the continuing disclosure, and then finally a bond purchase agreement to issue the bonds. City has been chosen by COME as its underwriter. City is one of the largest underwriters, if not the largest underwriter of water bonds in California. So certainly from my perspective, it's a very comfortable appointment for bond underwriter. We'll participate in the pricing and reviewing the pricing and the like. In terms of the process, we have drafts of legals. They're going through the member unit approvals. So a somewhat more complicated process than I think any of us anticipated, but we're working our way through. We will be going for bond ratings on the bond issue. It will be rated based on what we call a weak link rating, which is it's a pool. Nobody's covering anybody else, so it really, in effect, is off the weakest credit. But everybody's about the same because it's the same demographics, so I don't think that's going to be an issue. We're hoping for AA level ratings, probably AA minus. COME approves it, the bond issue, and then the member units have to ratify it. And then we'll distribute official statements, sell bonds, and close. And I frankly don't have a good sense of what the schedule is right now because it's been changing constantly. But ideally, we will have money on hand by the time there is a contract award. And other than that, I don't know, Doug, if there's anything you have to amend to this. Here to answer questions.
I just have one.
Sure.
So, in looking at the airport bond, that worked out okay for us.
Yeah, you did very well.
For here.
We had remarkable timing.
Yeah.
We should always do so well.
So, your opening paragraph here says municipal bond market has steadily improved, and so I'm wondering, what do you think 6 months from now is going to do?
Well, the flip answer to that is always, if I really knew that, I'd be at my beach house right now. But there's no reason to think that the bond market's going to get worse. I mean, the big concern these days is inflation, and the reports have been good. But the sort of cloud is there's been a lot of federal borrowing, and that is typically can be inflationary. So in the long run, who knows? It's really hard I would say that there's no indicators now in the marketplace that rates are on the verge of rising, but I get very little confidence from that.
Well, I think if we're talking 5, 10, 15 years out before striking this, then we might be in an inflationary period. Who knows? But the basic economic data would suggest that we're headed for inflation at some point. So I guess what I was really trying to get at is, do we strike the deal now or 6 months from now? And you're saying,
Yeah, I
no,
would
just as good as
say,
any.
Personally, I tend to recommend timing bond issuance around project needs, because I just realize that you just can't outsmart the market, and the more you have, the real information is your project costs and being provided. But I would say this, there would be no reason to delay a bond issue in anticipation of the market improving, and there's a lot of downside risk of the market going the wrong way. The rates are not at the lowest they've ever been, but they're pretty darn good right now.
Right. So the odds are things are could get worse, and this is good enough. Is
Yeah,
what we're
I've
saying.
seen. I can't quote this, but I've seen we're at
Yeah.
the lowest, the 80 percentile, and I believe it's something in the lowest quarter of rates over a reasonable
Right.
historic period.
I agree with that.
That's about as
Yeah.
good as you can ask for.
Okay. Committee.
Those are all your questions?
Well, I'm ready to move the staff recommendation.
I'll second it.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries.
Good luck, Kate.